Can you really speed build a killer gaming PC on a $400 budget with zero PC building experience? Well, if you're watching this video right now, then yes, you definitely can. So stay tuned because I'm going to show you exactly what parts you'll need as well as how to build it step by step, and we're going to benchmark this thing at the end to see how it performs. Don't forget to check the affiliate links below for links to everything I'll be using today as well as their latest prices. Okay, let's get started. Hey guys, it's Mark here. Hope you're all staying home and staying safe. I'm back today with a budget gaming PC build to show you how to maximize your budget and translate it into the best bang for your buck in terms of gaming performance. Last week, my nephew asked me to build him a gaming PC on a $400 budget, so here it is. Today I'm going to be showing you how to speed build this $400 console killer. It has decent upgradability too, so you can always improve it more in the future when your budget allows. But before we get to building it, let's take a look at what's going to be inside it. And just as a brief disclaimer, yes, this build actually totals to $400, unlike some other $400 builds I found, which when you add all the components to your basket, somehow ends up at $500. It's weird that I felt the need to say this, but yes, this PC build actually does cost $400. First of all, the processor I'm going to be using today is the AMD Ryzen 3 3200G. It's a GPU and a CPU combined into a single unit, which is going to do wonders at keeping the cost down here, so no graphics card required today. The processor has a 4-core, 4-thread CPU with clock speeds of 3.6 GHz and a boost speed up to 4 GHz. It's actually insane how powerful integrated graphics have become, and the contents of this humble box alone will be the backbone of this gaming PC. For the motherboard, I've chosen the god tier MSI B450M Pro M2 Max. This offers everything you'd want in a gaming motherboard, and the Max version means it has the BIOS update to support 3rd generation Ryzen CPUs. Despite our tight budget, I found room for 16 GB of Corsair's DDR4 Vengeance LPX 3200 MHz RAM, which is going to be the icing on the cake for consistent gaming performance and compensate nicely for the lack of dedicated graphics memory that you'd ordinarily get with a standalone graphics card. In terms of storage, I've picked the Kingston A400 480GB solid state hard drive, an absolute steal compared to other brands which are almost double the price for 20 extra gigabytes or so. It's not the most storage in the world, but it has great read and write speeds that will blow away traditional hard drives. And of course, you can always add more storage later. When it comes to power supplies, I'm going to be installing the Thermaltake 600 watt smart RGB power supply here today. It's actually a little overkill in terms of power for this build, but it does future-proof it for upgrades down the line. It also has RGB lights, which of course should fit nicely with the case that I've got here. That case being the AeroCool Cylon mid-tower RGB case. For an extra few bucks here, you're getting a tempered glass side panel as opposed to the acrylic side windows of options that are literally maybe $3 or $4 cheaper, so you might as well get this one. This case also has tons of USB ports on top, as well as an SD card reader as well, so that's a nice added bonus. And that's everything. There's no graphics card required here, as it's integrated into the processor, as I said. So in the nature of speed building this, let's just get on with it. But before we do that, make sure you're subscribed to this channel and hit the bell too, because in 2020, I'm going to do videos on a lot of affordable tech, stuff like this included. So hitting that button is an easy way to come along for the ride. And don't forget to go follow me on Instagram for Photoshop edits of everything I review here on the channel. Okay, I feel like I'm even speed talking now, so let's get building. So first of all, here's everything you'll need. Yep, it's this super high-tech invention called a screwdriver. Or, if you fancy, you could use a Swiss Army knife that hopefully has a screwdriver in it. And some tweezers. Please don't do that. Just as a general rule here, try to touch your components as little as possible and always ground yourself by briefly touching the inside of your case before handling any components, especially if you're walking around the house a lot on carpet. So first of all, get your motherboard unpackaged and lay it on top of the box that it came in. We'll be using this as our anti-static workstation to install the first few components. So let's start with the processor. It comes with the heatsink, but leave that in the box for later. We just want the much smaller processor in the plastic packaging for now. So this is very simple. On the motherboard, raise the metal arm by lifting it and gently nudging it away from the socket until it's erect. Grab your processor. Please do not touch either the top side or the gold metal pins on the bottom side while handling it, and just line up that gold triangle with the triangle on the motherboard. Literally just gently let it fall into place so it's seated and no longer moves around. Lower the metal arm and lock it back into place. Remove the brackets either side of the processor by unscrewing the screws and removing the plastic bits that remain, because we won't need these for this build. Next, unbox the stock heatsink, and please make sure that you do not touch the underside of it, as that's where the pre-applied thermal paste is. So line the heatsink up on top of the processor and use your screwdriver to screw in all 4 screws into the motherboard. Make sure the AMD logo is actually on the left-hand side of the motherboard next to the inputs. Ignore the logo in the middle of the fan, of course. Finally, plug the fan's power cable into the CPU fan header next to the RAM slots. So, to install your RAM, simply open the side latches of the RAM slots, which are literally right next to the heatsink you just installed. Now the latches are open, grab your RAM sticks and pay attention to the notch by the gold teeth on each stick. Line this notch up with the notch in the slot on your motherboard, and once you've aligned them correctly, gently push them in until you feel them slot into place. You'll know when they're in properly because the side latches will automatically close themselves with a rather satisfying snap. Great job so far, you are doing great. Now it's time to prep your case, so remove both side panels using the thumb screws and lay the case down so that you can see into it. And also, side note, please place the glass panel somewhere where you won't accidentally sit or stand on it and break it and ruin your life. Firstly, we're going to install the I/O shield that came in the box with your motherboard. You simply use your hands, you know, those things you have, to pop it into the gaping hole from the inside of the case. Of course, make sure the shiny blank side of the shield is facing the inside of the case. I'm going to throw in a couple of fairly cheap but awesome BeQuiet fans here because extra cooling never hurts, and we've only got 1 fan in the case. You don't need to add these, but I had them lying around, so they're better off here in my nephew's PC than in my cupboard doing nothing. So I'm just going to screw these in by removing the front of the case first. Once removed, you can simply then screw your fans in from the outside of the case using the screws that came with the fan. We want the fans to intake air, so make sure that the logo on the fan is facing the outside of the case. You can now place the front of the case back on. I will link those fans in the description as well. And you'll probably notice that the case has some pre-installed motherboard standoffs, but it's up to us to screw the last ones in by hand. Now, you should be able to work out where to put the extra ones by simply looking at the holes on your motherboard and then simply screwing in by hand a standoff in the corresponding place in the case. But in case you're too lazy for all that, here's where I put them. If you've got the same motherboard, this is where they'll go. Next, gently lower the motherboard into the case. Try not to do it by holding the heatsink, and wiggle the inputs through the I/O shield. They should fit pretty nicely. That is the best way to make sure the motherboard is roughly in the right place at the moment, and the small holes on the motherboard should align with the standoffs we just installed too. Using the screws provided with your case, screw in your motherboard to the standoffs, and definitely don't over tighten them please, because it'll only annoy you if you have to take your motherboard back out. Now it's time to install the power supply. This isn't particularly hard, like most of this isn't so far, but cable management here can mean a difference between a neat install or a really damn messy one. So now your motherboard is securely installed, flip your case over and then slide the power supply in with the on-off switch obviously facing out of the case and the cables facing the inside of the case, with the fan side down as we have a dust filter down there. From the outside of the case, screw in the 4 screws that came with your power supply to secure it into place. Okay, so now for the SSD, there's actually 2 places I can mount this, and they're actually in pretty good locations for a cheap case. So I'm going to choose to mount it where it will be totally hidden behind the motherboard at the rear of the case. So line it up with the holes in the mounting bracket and screw it in at all 4 points until it's nice and secure. So take the SATA power cable from your power supply and plug it into your SSD. It can take a little bit of wiggling to get it into place. And that is it for now. We will plug the SATA cable in later. Next, locate the 24-pin ATX cable like this and the 8-pin CPU connector as well, and feed them through the top cutout through your case. and shove all of the other cables coming off your power supply into the big gap at the bottom of the case. Flip your case onto its back again so you can see the motherboard, and now locate your case's front panel connectors. Shouldn't be too hard, they are literally hanging from the top of the case and getting in the way. For tidy cable management, take the whole bunch and feed them through this cutout here to the back of the case. Then route them back through to the front of the case via these cutouts at the very bottom of the case, right next to where they'll be plugged in. These need to be plugged into the motherboard basically so that the power button on top of your case, the hard drive LEDs and all those ports on top as well will actually have any function. All the front panel connectors are labeled, and your motherboard manual or the actual motherboard itself will have a little diagram to tell you which one goes where. But again, here's where they should go if you are too lazy. So the HD audio cable simply goes in the bottom left JAUD1 port. The USB front panel connectors look like these. Feel free to ignore that little extra cable coming off of the big blue USB 3 connector and just put that in right here into the biggest port that clearly only fits this one. Again, ignore that small cable left over. And then the other one goes into JUSB 1 like so. Your motherboard header connectors are probably the fiddliest, but by no means difficult because they are all labeled and they go right into this port here. And there's actually a handy diagram on the motherboard which shows you exactly where they should go. So this shows you how that little diagram lines up with each pin on the motherboard. So simply match them with the labels on the motherboard header cables. And last but not least, your USB card reader simply goes into JUSB 2. Next, plug in the fan that's mounted to the side of your case into your motherboard. So, you're almost there. Now we need to just take the last few cables from the power supply and get those all plugged in. First of all, start by plugging in your 24-pin ATX cable, the biggest one in other words, to your motherboard like so. Just simply align the clip on the cable with the latch on the plug. You should hear a nice satisfying click when it's securely in place. Next, your 8-pin CPU connector, which you'll need to insert to the plug right by the processor and the heatsink. Simply plug that in until you hear another click. Locate the SATA cable that came with your motherboard and find the angled end of the cable. It's simply a matter of plugging it into SATA 1, which just takes a little gentle pressure and a little bit of a wiggle. Feed it through the cutout literally next to the SATA ports, and we'll be plugging this into our SSD that we installed earlier. It's simply a case of plugging it in. Now we're aiming for neat cable management here, so that means we have got most of them at the rear of the case being fed through. So you might want to tidy these up, compact them down so that you can actually get the side of the case back on later. And also I fed through the 2 fans I installed earlier at the front of the case. And they need to be plugged into something because the motherboard doesn't actually have enough fan headers to incorporate these extra fans. So I had to buy this extra Molex cable just to plug in those 2 extra fans, which you won't need unless you're adding the optional fans. And last but not least, our front panel connectors need power, so take a SATA power cable from the power supply and simply plug it into the power cable of your front panel connectors. And now's the time to do a last minute check of all those cables. Make sure they're nice and flat and not sticking out the case too much. You can have a little bit of a rat's nest next to the power supply, but that's totally fine. They won't be seen from the front of the case at all. And now you can put the side of your case back on. And if you've compressed all your cables enough, then it should just slide back on no problems. And then you can simply screw back on the original thumb screws to secure the side back in place. Congratulations, you just built a PC, but will it actually turn on? That's the most important thing. So get it all hooked up to your monitor, mouse, keyboard, plug the mains power into the power supply, hit the power button on your case. If nothing happens, then rewatch this video in shame to make sure you haven't screwed anything up. Make sure you haven't forgotten to plug anything in, and also double check your motherboard manual to make sure your front panel connectors are in the right place so your power button is actually working. If it actually does turn on and post, especially first time, then you're a smarter person than I am. So next you need to install Windows and the drivers for your PC, and because that information is out there in the world and is going to be exactly the same whether I tell you or someone else tells you, I'm just going to throw some very helpful, useful links that I found fairly recently to show you exactly how to do that. So check the description for that. What we're going to do next though is test performance. So the results are in, and I have to say I am really impressed at all the heavy lifting the APU does across a ton of different games. You're looking at around 50 to 60 FPS on average with low graphics settings at either 1080p or 1600 by 900 depending on what you're playing, of course. For the money we've spent here, this build offers insane value for money with great upgradability down the road. But of course, it's still well worth throwing a standalone graphics card at this thing when your budget allows. That way, you'll almost guarantee that high 90 to 100 FPS average and the ability to play all games at 1080p no problems. I'll link said graphics card below in the description. It costs about $150 extra and is well worth saving up for next. Overall, this build offers great bang for your buck. It's nice and quiet, and without a doubt, it is perfect for anybody's first gaming PC. Now that you've watched this video, click here to watch my latest video. Who knows what it could be? It could be a mystery. It's going to be good either way. Or you can click here to watch what happens when you buy a $10 Apple Watch on wish.com. Spoiler alert, it's not great. So pick one of those and I'll see you in the next video.